So the Imam, he says here that the fourth benefit is social intimacy. Basically, that you can benefit and partake in relationships with other people, and then you can be there for others as a part of that relationship, that they as well benefit from that social intimacy. And this is for all the extroverts out there. You introverts probably aren't too interested in this, or you struggle with this. Maybe you don't have a great deal of concern for this, but those that are very social and they thrive in social settings and they really, really enjoy friendships and relationships, and they find a great deal of enrichment in that, then this is one of the great benefits that you have lived with and experienced on a regular basis. And so when you are isolated, then you feel deprived. And this social intimacy, or this relationship that we have with one another, can actually be considered mustahab, the more that it is related to having relationships with people of piety. Obviously, if we're talking about developing relationships with people that are wicked sinners, then that relationship is unhealthy, and it will have a negative impact on you as a person and your spirit, your soul. So the relationships that you develop with pious people and positive influences, those can be very, very beneficial and religiously encouraged. These types of relationships that we can create with each other, they can also be a way in which the heart finds rest from the sorrows and the grief of loneliness when we are alone. When we do take time to be alone, we get together with people and we enjoy social settings in order to find a little bit of rest. We like to have, variety. Variety is a great thing. Even in our faith, we find a great deal of variety. When it comes to worshiping Allah, there's variety in worship. There's prayer, there's zakat, there's hajj, there's Ramadan, there's the obligatory, there's the recommended, there's the voluntary. There's 2 rakahs in Salat al-Fajr, there's 4 in Dhuhr, there's 3 in Maghrib, etc. There's a lot of variety, and the variety is very, very good for us, even when it comes now to this aspect of relationships or being alone. So basically, the Imam, he says that it's important that the social intimacy that we seek is done sparingly, if you will, so that it does not disrupt or corrupt the rest of our time. You have to be balanced. That's important as a Muslim, is that you live a balanced life. You strive to strike a balance in everything that you do. So you can certainly go overboard in your interactions and your relationships and your engagements with people, to the point that you would sacrifice the time needed to pursue your religious obligations and what would require you to be alone, to handle on your own. So we want to be balanced even when we are seeking that social intimacy and interaction. And also, it's important that when you do gather with people and you get together with each other, that you focus your conversations and your interactions on faith-based things. You keep it religious. You keep it not R-rated as in restricted, but R-rated as in religiously rated, spiritually sound meetings and engagements with people. That way they can be not only enjoyable during that setting, but also spiritually healthy and not harmful. The next benefit, this is number 5. So we talked about number 4 being social intimacy and engagement. Number 5 is obtaining reward and also according or affording and conferring the opportunity to receive reward through you. Obtaining the reward through others by various opportunities that you can get, and then affording them that same opportunity to get reward. And the examples that he gives here of you getting the reward is like attending the funeral prayers, visiting the sick, or in some cases when you can't visit, calling right? It may not be appropriate to visit if it's a contagious disease or something. We now have been blessed in such a way that technology allows us to visit while we're not physically there. Making a phone call, getting on the video conferencing, those types of things where you can actually conduct a great visit, even seeing one another while maintaining distance. So that's another way to do that. Also, going to invitations, answering people's invitations, etc., visiting them on special occasions. These are all avenues where you can get good reward, perform good deeds through social engagement. And it basically all comes to, where does it come from? Where's the direct link between these social engagements and righteous action? That is, as was mentioned by the Imam here, being a source of happiness for others. When you go to the funeral, it's a source of happiness and comfort for the family members that are there. It's obviously you're fulfilling the right of another Muslim, but for the social setting of it, your presence can be appreciated. Attending the weddings, the functions, those types of things are also, they've invited you because they want you there to share in that moment, and when you're there, it makes them happy, etc. So that's the link. The link of these social engagements is bringing about happiness, providing people with a source of happiness. Then from the other aspect where you're going to give people the opportunity to obtain reward, and that is by opening your door to them, letting them in your life so that they can too visit you if you're sick, that they can go and they can convey condolences, for example, if you've lost a loved one. They can congratulate you on various successes and things. And by doing this, they'll be able to obtain reward through your allowing of that engagement. He also mentions here that if you're from the scholars, the religiously learned, then you offer reward for people to visit you by opening your door. They could take benefit from you. They could be in your presence, which hopefully would be a positive presence of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He also says here that, when it comes to these types of engagements, this social intimacy, you have to be very smart. You have to weigh the benefits and the harms. What are the potential outcomes here? What is it that you're going to sacrifice? Because everything comes with a sacrifice, right? So if you're going to go and be engaged socially, then you're going to have to sacrifice time by yourself where you could be doing something else. So what is it that you're giving up? Or if you're going to go spend time alone, spiritually seclude yourself, what is it that you're going to sacrifice on the other end? What other opportunities are you missing out on? And I've hinted at some of that in the previous sessions, in that, there are benefits and there are negatives, there are positive and negatives to both things. And so you have to be very diligent when it comes to weighing those things out before you make a decision what you should be doing. So essentially, the spiritual seclusion, spiritual seclusion and fellowship, there's not one absolute ruling here, but it all comes down to a person's individual situation and what they believe to be of most benefit. Even though many of the scholars of the past, the pious of the past, they preferred to remain secluded for the many reasons that I previously mentioned. Next, benefit number 6. And this is one of the most profound benefits, is humility. By being involved in social settings and relationships, you are presented with the opportunity of humility and to be humbled. This doesn't happen when you're alone, typically. In fact, sometimes a person would withdraw themselves from community life because they feel as if they're better than others. And this is the opposite of what you should be doing if you're seeking spiritual seclusion. That's not the intent behind it. Like, look, I'm better than everybody else. If I start mixing with these people, it's going to detract from my status and my honor. It's going to detract and diminish my nobility or my position in the community. I can't be seen with certain types, etc., etc. That's not humility. Our Prophet ﷺ, he mixed and mingled with everybody, from the rich to the pauper, from the elite in their community to the most lowly and humble, if you will. That was the way of the Prophet ﷺ, and that was also the way of many of the great companions and pious leaders that came after that. So you want to use social engagement as a means to being humble with people, interacting with them in a humble way, and not seeing yourself above everybody else. So you pull away. That's incorrect. And so I want to give you an example. I want to share an example of humility from the greats. And this was the story of Umar ibn al-Khattab. The Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ, he himself, and he's the Prophet. I mean, he is the best of mankind. His status is unmatched. And he has everything at his disposal. I mean, he could order people to do for him and serve him however he wanted. But he would go to the marketplace himself, and he would purchase things for himself or for his household, and he would carry them home. And, it's narrated that in numerous traditions or hadith, numerous narrations that he went and he had with him, he did have servants or he did have assistants, and they served and assisted him in certain capacities. But at some level or another, he was very independent and would be very particular about how he handled himself in a very humble way. So he went and he bought something from the store or the marketplace. And as the assistant or the servant was like, look, okay, let me carry it for you, which would have been rightfully his job. But the Prophet, ﷺ, he says, "Sahibu shay ahaqqu bihamlihi." Right? The owner of something has more right to carrying it. It's their burden to carry. And so the Prophet ﷺ would insist on carrying his own things. Of course, there are some exceptions to this. If the person is physically unable to do so or very elderly and it's very difficult, then the person that is assisting them, it would be their job and their duty to do that. However, the Prophet ﷺ, he was capable, and so that's what he did. The person who owns the thing, صاحب الشيء أحق بحمله, has more right and more deserving to carry that around. And so with that, I want you to keep that kind of idea or that concept in mind when I share you the story about Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. This is when he was the Khalifa. During his the latter days of his Khilafah, of his life, Umar ibn al-Khattab, he took to wandering the streets of Medina and just checking on people, because he became, I don't want to say overwhelmed with the sense of responsibility and the magnitude of that job, but he took it very seriously, and so he was worried about everybody's state of affairs and condition. So he would go throughout the streets. They said that this was noted physically because he became darker. Like the physical color became darker because he was constantly out in the sun. So he was being tanned by the sun. And so he would walk around and he would check on people and ask how everybody was doing. And he always had with him somebody, an assistant and a helper. And so it was said that one night late in Al-Madinah, they were walking around and they noticed off in the distance at night there was a fire burning. And so he went to go and see what was happening there, who had started the fire, and if there was anything that he could do. And so when he got there, or close to it, he noticed that it was a woman and some crying babies. And so he kind of like kept his distance and made his presence aware so that she would, could receive and engage with him without being surprised. And so when he got there, he didn't let her know who he was. He just asked, what's going on with these kids? Why are they crying? And she said, look, these children are crying because they're hungry. And he looked at the fire that was lit and he saw that there was a pot boiling on the fire. And he said, well, why don't you feed them what you're cooking? And the woman said, look, I don't have anything to cook. He's like, well, what are you talking about? It's like, look, I'm just boiling water in hopes that they'll think that something's cooking and it'll just continue to cook and they'll eventually fall asleep and they'll stop crying. And he's like, oh my goodness, what a situation. And she says, where's the Amir? Where's Amir al-Mu'mineen? He's forgotten about us. She basically says, that he took over the management of our affairs, and then he forgot about us. And Umar ibn Khattab was like, he still didn't say anything like who he was. He was like, wait, say good words, say something positive about your Amir. And she's just like, what can I say? I'm in dire straits, and I'm just here all by myself. And so Umar ibn al-Khattab, he left with his assistant. He went back into the city of Al-Madinah. He gathered food and got it all put together, and he went to throw all of that. He told his assistant, he said, look, put it on my back. He says, put it on my back. And the assistant said, no, let me carry it. Like, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, leader of the faithful, let me carry this. And so what does Umar say? He says, are you going to carry my burdens Yawm al-Qiyamah? He says, هل تحمل عني وزر يوم القيامة? Are you going to carry the burden of my sin on the day of resurrection? And so he carried that stuff, and he took it all the way back out. This was outside of the city, and he proceeded to prepare the food for that lady and the kids, and stayed around, basically prepared it, served it, backed away so that they could have their privacy and space, let them eat, and he basically sat around to make sure that everything was done. And that was the humility of Umar ibn al-Khattab when it came to the social engagements that he was presented with. And that's, the opportunity that we have in community life and in fellowship, that we can be presented with opportunities to be humbled and to be, to deal with one another in a very humble way. And that, of course, the more humble you are with people, the loftier you are in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that won't happen unless you have the opportunity to mix with people and to deal with them in such a way. So that's the conclusion of the sixth benefit of social engagement, as mentioned by the great Imam Ibn Qudamah. There's actually a seventh. Here in our text, he balances 6 benefits of uzla and 6 benefits of fellowship. However, if you look into Ihya, you find there's a 7th, and I think this is important, so I brought it to your attention here, and that is life experience. Experience that can be gained through community life and engaging and interacting with people that you can't get by yourself. There's something to be said about learning the theory of things and studying things, but then never having the opportunity to practice those things. But the real learning, the genuine learning, thorough, understanding of these theories and principles is best achieved by practice. And I'm speaking from experience here. I mean, just looking at, for example, some topics in Islamic law, some of the intricate theories and rulings on certain issues in the Islamic law, you don't, for many people, there are special people that they're like sponges and they absorb things and they don't require a great deal of follow through or application. But for many people, they will not be able to truly understand or master those concepts until they apply them, or they deal with somebody that's living through that and they have to help work through those problems and situations as they arise. So gaining life experience through engaging your community is also a great benefit of, fellowship and community life that cannot be overlooked. So I'll wrap it up with this, a couple of closing thoughts for this particular section. After having heard about the benefits of both spiritual seclusion and community life and fellowship, as well as the downfalls of both, if you really think about it, and trying to determine what the ruling is this an obligation? Is this a preference? Which one is preferred? Then there is nothing to conclude except that there is no cookie cutter ruling here. Which one is better? But it all comes down to a person's current predicament and circumstance. What is going to be better for them? And so here, if a person were to give you a end-all ruling, like this one's better than that one or that one's better than this one, then they would be talking about themselves. They would be basically giving you their personal experience and attitude towards that thing, because that may not be the best for the person they are talking to. So try and keep a balance here. Keep in mind that withdrawing from people or deserting people, it will incur enmity from others, but overly extending yourself will bring about evil. You have to balance those things, like, constantly keeping them in flow, if you will, enough to balance. So you try and be, as this was mentioned by Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, he says, you try and be between both, withdrawal and also, inclusion.